Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues brings expert guests to the airwaves to talk through your divorce questions and fill in the gray areas about separating. From thinking about divorce to how to behave during divorce to what to do after, this is Divorce Dialogue. Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group and a trainer at the Center for Understanding in Conflict, and I am on a mission to change how people divorce and help them divorce with dignity. And my guest today is Jeffrey Peltz. He's a Brooklyn-based attorney with nearly 4 decades of experience guiding clients through divorce, immigration, and other life-changing legal matters, as well as bankruptcy, I believe. And he's the founder of his own firm, and he's known for treating his clients like family and helping more than 25,000 people navigate complex challenges with compassion and clarity. Just my kind of lawyer. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey Peltz.
Hi, Catherine. How you doing?
So you've practiced law for a very long time, and you've helped a lot of people. I've also practiced law for a very long time, and I've also helped a lot of people. But what was it that drew you to focus on bankruptcy and divorce, and how do you see those areas kind of intersecting in the work that you do with your clients?
Well, I want to do something that could help the ordinary person. I never wanted to get into law to work for a big corporation. Never want to, work for Wall Street. Helping people is what I cared about. And divorce, bankruptcy, immigration, real estate, those are things that most people need help with. So I thought it makes sense to focus on those things. And I started at first with real estate and with matrimonial law, and quickly went into bankruptcy and immigration. And they all work together very well because a lot of times in divorces, all those areas of law into play. So it's good to have a background in all those areas.
It definitely is. And a lot of people who face divorce also face financial strain. And it could be that it wasn't so great financially before their marriage started to fall apart. And a lot of people have a lot of extra strain on their marriage when there are financial difficulties. And so, in your experience, how often do divorce and bankruptcy overlap?
Not every case at all, but in enough cases, you would expect that too, because a lot of divorces involve money problems and bankruptcy comes into that. So, maybe in the quarter of the cases or so, it's going to be an issue. And having a bankruptcy attorney do an analysis to see what can be done, I think is a very important part of helping the couple.
Yeah. I know that there are a lot of protections in divorce around bankruptcy and probably protections in bankruptcy around divorce. And I know, but before we sort of delve into what those are, Jeffrey Peltz, what do you think are some of the most common financial challenges divorcing couples face that might push them toward considering bankruptcy? I can imagine a few, like credit card debt or something like that, but what do you see since your practice encompasses both areas?
Obviously, credit card debt is the most common type of debt. And a lot of people get into debt little by little over years. And before they realize that they're so far into debt, they have tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And when you're doing a divorce, it's a good time to think about, can you get out of debt through bankruptcy? And it could help both people in the divorce. And sometimes it's better to do the bankruptcy before the divorce takes place.
Since you mentioned that financial concerns are something that leads people to reach a divorce, do you think that financial concerns are a major factor in the lives of your clients that lead to the divorce, or is that also a symptom of a different problem?
Well, it could be either one, but I think being in debt causes a lot of stress in the couple, and it causes conflict. And the reason they got into the conflict, the reason they got into the debt could be underlying issues. But straightening out the financial issues, I think, is important to both of them. And before they divorce is a good time to consider, you know, doing bankruptcy or considering bankruptcy. But yeah, debt definitely causes a lot of stress in marriages.
I'm wondering if you find that when there's debt, one person blames the other, or they both blame each other. Do you find that, or is it, oh yeah, we just did this together? I mean, that's not our experience. So
You know, I think it's human nature to blame someone else. You know, he'll say she charges so much, and she'll say he's so irresponsible. You know, you hear the same thing over the years. I mean, occasionally some people come and say, "Yeah, we both screwed up and we really got to debt." But I think more likely one's going to blame the other. But you know, regardless, it like I said this a few times. You know, this is a good time to reconsider. You know, where you are and what could be done by bankruptcy and try to clear things out. But yeah, people do seem to blame each other. Yes.
Well, I'm asking that because you've been talking about both people filing bankruptcy before the divorce, right? And I'm just wondering how willing people are. Why should I declare bankruptcy? You're the one who spent all the money. Like, how do you help people like wrap their head around that?
Well, you know, your client, if you're going to have both the husband and wife, or both spouses, I should say, as filing bankruptcy together, you want their interests to be together if you're representing both of them. And sometimes that can't be done. Sometimes their interests are conflicting. They just can't get along. It's not possible. So in that case, maybe you need two bankruptcy lawyers, one for each spouse. And also, when you file bankruptcy and you have children involved, well, let me back up a little. When you file bankruptcy to qualify, just a little summary of bankruptcy, how it works. So it's Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Chapter 7 bankruptcy is the type of bankruptcy most people file, and that's the good type of bankruptcy. That's the type of bankruptcy that wipes out all, well, most debt, not all debts, and we'll get more into that. Chapter 13 is a repayment plan of some or all your debt, and Chapter 13 should be thought of as Plan B if Plan A, Chapter 7 doesn't work. So to qualify for a Chapter 7, the bankruptcy court looks at the household income and household size. So if you have a spouse that has a large amount of money coming in, let's say $100,000, relatively, you know, a lot of money, and one spouse only has, you know, $20,000, and you have like four kids, five kids. I'm sorry, you have a family of four, a family of five, so you have two or three kids. Well, it might be a good time for the spouse with a lot of income to file the Chapter 7 bankruptcy because before the house splits up, it's a household of four or five, and that would allow them to qualify to file bankruptcy. If they both have debt, they could both file a joint petition. And let's say one of the spouses have most of the income, the other spouse doesn't have to file bankruptcy if he or she doesn't have debt, but the household size still could be used for the spouse that has a lot of income. So I think I got off on a tangent over here. So help me out.
Let me just make sure. So I think what you're saying is that by having a combined petition, that the fair amount of income that one person has doesn't disqualify them from making a potentially doesn't disqualify them from making a successful bankruptcy petition if they have enough people in their household. But on the other side of divorce, now the bankruptcy court is going to be looking at all of that income and wondering why they can't just pay it back instead of having it wiped away. Is that right?
Right, right. So let's just say the spouse with more income is now living separate apart, has $100,000 income, and now a family of one in New York, the median income for a family of one is $68,000. That's not going to work. That person's not going to be able to file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and it's going to be stuck either dealing with it without bankruptcy, filing a Chapter 13 and repaying part or probably all of the debt in a payment in a Chapter 13 repayment plan.
All right. So I just want to remind our listeners that I'm Catherine Miller and you're listening to Divorce Dialogues. It's a podcast dedicated to educating people about divorce related topics so that everyone can divorce with dignity. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to be sure that you don't miss an episode. And I'm talking today with Jeffrey Peltz about bankruptcy and divorce and how right now we're talking about the difference between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. And so maybe we could just go back, Jeffrey, one more minute and say, you refer to Chapter 7 as being the good kind of bankruptcy, I think because it really wipes the slate clean. Chapter
Yes.
13 being a kind of repayment plan where you're repaying some or all of the debt on basically an installment plan. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that for people to qualify for the Chapter 7, they can't be earning too much money relative to the size of their household, right?
Correct.
And so
Correct.
that if people are facing a lot of debt, even if they're divorcing, that thinking about the timing of the petition, both people don't necessarily, I think you said this, don't have to declare bankruptcy, but if one person declares bankruptcy while they're still a legally intact family, then that person can benefit from the larger family size when the petition is filed. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And one of the things I said I was going to get back to is certain debts are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Spousal support, child support, definitely not for bankruptcy. And there's other things which are not dischargeable, mostly student loans and sometimes taxes, or there's exceptions to it. Sometimes taxes are dischargeable. Parking tickets are not dischargeable. Penalties on tolls are not dischargeable, and any kind of court penalty kind of charge is not dischargeable. So when you file bankruptcy, if you owe child support or spousal support, you have to disclose that to the court, and that's not dischargeable.
So, just getting back to the emotional frame of the divorce and the bankruptcy, both of those seem like, hard, hard to go through. And I don't mean to make light of it, right? But to sort of, it seems like really piling on to go through the stress of divorce and the stress of bankruptcy. And I think it's not just stress, Jeffrey Peltz, it's their shame there for a lot of people. Is that your experience of your clients?
Oh, yeah, that's a real consideration, is getting people past that. And I try to tell them filing bankruptcy is like a business decision, it's a financial decision, and nothing to do with shame. Just think of all the corporations and wealthy people who file bankruptcy. It's a business thing. And a lot of times people will do everything they can not to file bankruptcy to their damage. That what they do is they damage their finances. A lot of times people will do things like, well, take money from their retirement account. And if you take money from your retirement account, that's a real shame, because when you file bankruptcy, you could keep the money in your retirement account. It's all exempt. You could keep it. They'll go to all these companies that advertise that they could negotiate with your creditors. They have a secret way of doing things, and it's mostly a scam. So what they do is they'll say, we're going to settle with your creditors, we're going to negotiate with your creditors. They phrase it different ways, but it's all the same thing. What they do is they take the money from you, you pay them, they collect their fees up front, and they say, don't pay your creditors, don't talk to your creditors. And then sometimes they negotiate with creditors, and maybe a couple creditors will make a deal. And if they make a deal, let's say you owe $10,000 and the creditor agrees to take $5,000. Okay, so in theory, you save $5,000. But what they don't tell you is that $5,000 that was saved is forgiven debt and taxable by the IRS. So then you had to pay income tax on that. Unless you could prove you're insolvent, which is another burden upon you if you could prove that. So a lot of people get into that situation. And what commonly happens, very commonly happens, is that they find that the company that they hired really wasted their money. They're getting sued anyway. And then they say they want their money back, and the company they hired says, okay, yeah, well, you you could fire us, but by the way, our fees that we collect are collected up front. So we keep our fee, and maybe we'll refund some of the money to you, but our fee comes first. And then the people come to me to file bankruptcy.
Oh my God, that's so awful, Jeffrey Peltz. It's like it's really preying on the shame that people have about being in debt and their real desire not to file bankruptcy. And I think the whole point of bankruptcy is to keep that from happening. Is that
Yeah,
right?
they think that's going to stop them, and what they just wasted is a year or two, and they wasted thousands of dollars. And again, think of all the people who took the money out of their retirement accounts. They should be saving that money for retirement and not paying it to creditors for these unsecured debts. And a lot of times they can't take enough money out of their retirement account, and they still have to file bankruptcy. and now they have no money in retirement account, and they still wind up filing bankruptcy. It happens all the time.
And they owe taxes on the money they took out of the retirement account that might not
Yes,
even be dischargeable in bankruptcy. So they're
that's
really
correct.
in a terrible bind. So it seems like this is like one misconception that people have about bankruptcy is that it is a personal judgment, right? That it's a personal, like a black mark on who you are as a person, and it's not. What are some other misconceptions have about that people have about bankruptcy, especially in the context of divorce?
Well, I don't know. I think what comes to mind is what we have already discussed. It should be avoided. It's a shame, and you know, a lot of times they say my family told me not to do it. My family said I shouldn't file bankruptcy. It's terrible, and I should, pay my debts, and they can't afford to pay the debts, and eventually they need to file bankruptcy. So I think the shame is really the thing that I'm thinking about.
So do you think that bankruptcy can actually help simplify the financial issues in divorce, especially if there's a lot of debt?
Sure. So you have a middle class couple who owe $50,000 in credit cards. Well, you file bankruptcy, that's one less thing that, us as divorce lawyers have to deal with. And that couple now has $50,000 that they don't have to, get rid of. So yeah, it makes a big difference. So that's when people have financial difficulty, they should see, can they discharge the debt in bankruptcy? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes the income is too high and it's not a doable thing, but you should at least look into seeing if it's possible.
I know people have sold their houses when they get divorced and used some of the proceeds to pay off debt. Is that something that are people in New York, are people allowed to hold on to their houses if they declare bankruptcy or not?
Great question, Catherine. In New York, we have very generous exemptions for houses. If you live in the New York City area, Long Island, Lower Hudson Valley, the exemption on the house is $205,000 per person. So if the house is in both persons' names, that's $410,000 of equity you could protect from creditors. So you can still file bankruptcy and have $410,000 in equity in the house if you own it jointly.
Wow, that's really great information, I think, for our listeners to have. And speaking of that, you're listening to the Divorce Dialogues podcast, and I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues has been educating people about divorce related issues for over 10 years. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and don't forget to check out our previous episodes on the podcast website, divorcedialogues.com. And I'm talking today with attorney Jeffrey Peltz about the intersection of divorce and bankruptcy. And Jeffrey, if anybody is interested in learning more about you, getting in touch, finding out about your website, what can they do to do that?
Sure, you go to my website, it's lawyer.com. So it's just three A's, lawyer.com. And our phone number is 718-625-0800.
Great. So, I think that there's probably a lot of misconceptions about what happens on the other side of bankruptcy. Oh, it's terrible because you can never have a credit card and this and that and the other thing. So, Jeff, would you maybe just walk us through? Okay, you file a bankruptcy petition, whether or not you're getting divorced or not, your debt is wiped away. Like, I mean, what then? How do you rebuild your life then?
Another great question, Catherine. I like that question because most people don't realize bankruptcy is the first step to rebuild your credit. You're out of debt. Your FICO score usually goes up by an average of 100 points over the following year. Your creditors know if you file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you cannot file another one for 8 years. And they also know that you probably don't owe any debt. So you're a great credit risk. If you have income, you have a job, you can get a lot of credit card offers. And if you do that, yeah, I suggest you accept two of the best offers you could get, use your credit cards. But the trick to this is pay your credit cards every month. Use credit cards. That's how you build your credit and pay them every month. I pay my credit cards every week. I use the credit cards, I get the points, I pay at the end of the week. Never even goes to the next month. My credit score is perfect. It's that easy. And if you follow that advice, you'll be fine. So you could even buy a house 2 or 3 years after you file bankruptcy. If you have the income, you will qualify to buy a house. And I have represented over the years many people in their closings on their new homes after they file bankruptcy.
Wow. Because I actually was under the misconception that you had a 7-year blackout window after you filed bankruptcy that you were not allowed to, or you would not be granted a credit card. Allowed. I mean, who's going to allow you? But that was one of the rules. But I'm learning that I'm wrong about that.
Well, let me just elaborate on that. So when you have bad credit, it stays on your credit report for 7 years. So if you are late in your payments, it will be on your credit report for 7 years. Bankruptcy stays on your credit report for 10 years. However, it doesn't mean much after a couple of years. It's on your credit report, but really what matters is what you've done recently. So if you got discharged and you don't owe any money, your FICO score goes up, and you do what I told you, and your FICO score will really go high. Even though the bankruptcy would be on the credit report for 10 years, you're going to have great credit after a few years if you just follow my advice.
So, in your practice, how do you balance protecting a client's financial future and with this kind of advice? Because that is really, really good advice, but also guiding them through the emotional aspects of the transitions, the bankruptcy transition, the divorce transition. Because let's go back to the beginning of the show when we were talking about shame and the sense of judgment by the world that I'm a bad person, I'm not worthy of credit or worthy of respect.
I have to, some people, everyone's different. Some people come in, they're fine. Some should have came in years ago. But when they come in, I try to tell them what I said earlier, that this is a business decision. Businesses, wealthy people file bankruptcy. This is not a matter of shame. This is a matter of what makes financial sense to get your financial situation secure and try to get your finances on a steady, firm basis. And after they had so let's say I filed the bankruptcy and we have the hearings. By the way, the hearings these days are done on Zoom. You don't even have to go to court anymore. It's
Wow.
since COVID, they never went back to court. So it's on Zoom. You meet the trustee on Zoom. And of course, I prepare the client. I tell them what to expect. And I know around here, I know all the trustees really well. And all the trustees do their jobs. Even though I know them personally, it doesn't mean anything except they know the quality of my work and my character. But they do their job and they'll ask the questions. But after the hearing, it's very common for the client to be really, really, really a great burden is taken off their shoulders, and they're so happy. And they're, it's to see the reaction is really nice. And I know when I have the hearings in person, I got hugged and kissed many times.
Well, I spending this time talking to you, Jeffrey Peltz, about it, I can see why that your confidence and your knowledge and your advice as to how to rebuild life and the really non-judgmental way that you talk about what you've mentioned several times as being a business decision. So I can see why people would feel tremendously relieved. And I wonder, it seems like you just have such a respectful way of talking about this and talking about the situations that people find themselves in that lead to divorce or lead to bankruptcy. What leads to that philosophy? How'd you get there?
Oh, I don't know. I guess it's always been my nature. The nature of the person counts a lot. You've been a lawyer for a long time, and your nature carries through to your practice. You could be tripping over the words. It's been a long day, and it's going to come through. And if you're, kind of like a nasty person, that's going to come through in your practice. So I think it really comes through from your nature.
Well, in the last minute or two of the show, if somebody is listening to this thinking, wow, I really should do something about the debt, and my marriage isn't so great either, where do you think that person should begin to think about or take action toward doing something about it?
I think the first thing is finding out your rights and finding the right attorney to talk to, an attorney like you or an attorney like me, someone who is experienced, who has the right temperament and willing to sit down with someone. I think, and take the time to go over the facts with them. I think that's what the person needs. You shouldn't listen to your friends and family. They all mean well for you, but they're not attorneys, and they're going to give you bad advice. So don't listen to friends and family. Unless they say they have a lawyer they really like, maybe you might check out their lawyer, but don't take legal advice from friends and family.
I think that's really good advice. I have one more question for you, and that is, how does bankruptcy affect government entitlements? Like, let's say somebody is listening to this and they're also facing a debilitating disease and they want to do, like, they they think that maybe they would want to apply for Medicaid to care for long-term care, for caring for them if
Mhm.
they become debilitated. Is there any implication about that at all?
No, not at all. In fact, if you're on Social Security, it doesn't even count towards income. So there's something called the means test, which I alluded to earlier, and income is under Social Security is not even counted towards income. So if you have Social Security income and you have pension income, this pension counts, but not the Social Security. And that sometimes helps to qualify someone because certain income like Social Security is not counted as income.
Well, Jeffrey Peltz, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for being my guest on Divorce Dialogues.
Thank you, Catherine. It's been a pleasure.